Hello everyone. In this video, my partner Juan Jose Gil and I are going to present the balance of payments of Egypt in the last 10 years using data from different sources as the Observatory of Economic Complexity, the World Bank, and the IMF. In the first place, I am going to present some macroeconomic context of the country. In this chart, we can observe three aspects related to the poverty level. The poverty line is the minimum level of income per person required to live under an adequate standard of living. Egypt has adopted the poverty line suggested by the World Bank. The poverty rate is the amount of people living under the poverty line. We can observe that Egypt's poverty rate hasn't shown a clear trend, even though the percentages seem small. If we compare these percentages to United Kingdom's percentages, we can conclude that they could be much more lower, as UK's poverty rate has always been equal or below 0.05%. The Gini index is useful to understand inequality. We can see that Egypt's Gini index has always been oscillating close to 30, which is still high considering that values close to zero represent no inequality. However, if we compare it to UK, we can see that Egypt's Gini is always lower, which is positive. Now, we can see a clear growing trend to the GDP, which is good for the country. It is important to say that Egypt has been part of the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, since 1995. If we move to the migration data, we can see that the net migration, which is the difference between the number of immigrants and emigrants, has been very fluctuating through the years. However, most of the times it has been negative, which means that there is more people leaving the country than entering it, which can be interpreted as that there are other countries that could offer a better living to Egyptians. Some of them include countries in North America, Saudi Arabia, and European countries, as we can see here. Jumping to the gender equality topic, we can see a sad environment for Egypt. This chart shows the position occupied by the country in each subindex of the Global Gender Gap report. We can observe that amongst 146 countries, Egypt occupies some of the last places in most of the indexes, including the global ranking, in which it is positioned 134 out of 146. Finally, to analyze the country's position in the environment care, we show the PM 2.5 index, which shows the quality of the air in the country. In order to explain the relevance of this indicator, we will just say that according to the index, Egypt is the ninth most polluted country in the world.
Let's talk about the current account. We divided the current account into its three primary sections: the trade balance, the primary income, and the secondary income. First, we will explain the trade balance. As you can see in this table, the trade balance is divided into goods and services. We can see how for the past 10 years, the imports of goods has been larger than the exports of goods, which results in a deficit in the balance of goods. This happens because Egypt needs to import a lot of plant-based products like wheat, corn, soybeans, and capital products. Generally, these products can be produced by Egypt, either because of the climate or because of the technology. On the other side of the trade balance, we have services that, as we can see in this table, usually the exports are larger than the imports. This generates a surplus in the services, but it's not as big as a deficit in goods. This ultimately means that Egypt has a deficit in the trade balance, as we can see on this graph over here. This trade deficit means that Egypt consumes more than it produces, but it also means that Egypt relies more on the products from other countries. Now we will see the primary income of Egypt. As we can see in this table, for the past 10 years, Egypt has got a deficit in the primary income. This happens mainly because of the foreign direct investment that Egypt receives, which produces some interest that Egypt must pay to the other countries. In this graph, we can see how in the last 3 years, the primary income has been decreasing even more. This can be explained with the amount of investment that Egypt receives, especially in 2022. We will talk more about that in the financial account section. Lastly, we have the secondary income. This table shows us how the secondary income of Egypt has been in a surplus for the past 10 years. This happens mainly because of the remittances the people from Egypt receive from other fellows that live abroad. This surplus can also be explained with the net migration table. As we can see, since 2017, there are a lot of Egyptians living in the country, which can explain the amount of remittances.
Now I'm going to explain the commercial partners of Egypt. Starting with the exports, we can observe that countries as United States, Italy, India, Turkey, and Spain have always been their principal export destinations. If we move to a continental view, we can see that exports have always been directed the most to Asia, then to Europe and Africa. If we move to the imports, we can see that countries as United States, China, Turkey, and India have always been on the list. From a continental perspective, imports have always come mostly from Asia, Europe, and North America. The trade with Turkey and European countries can be easily explained as Egypt has a free trade agreement with Turkey directly and with some European countries. Now, from a deeper analysis, the product range theory states that the exports of a country are an extension of that country's internal demand. This explains how countries with similar internal demand are going to trade with Egypt. This theory states that developing countries usually trade with each other because of their similar preferences and their low income per capita. and demand low quality products. As we can see in the exports and imports of Egypt in both 2012 and 2022, they trade a lot with countries from Asia, like Turkey, United Arab States, and India. In this continent, there are mainly developing countries, so we can see how the product range theory fits Egypt. Even though this is true, we can also have to highlight that the product range theory can't explain trade between developing countries and developed ones. This scenario happens in the case of Egypt, as we can see they trade a lot with countries like United States, China, Germany, and France, which are developed countries. So to sum up, the product range theory explains how Egypt trades with developed countries because of their similarities in their internal demand. But this theory can't explain how Egypt also trades with countries like the United States and China, which have different internal demand and preferences. After explaining the commercial partners, it is important to analyze the commercialized products. For the exports, we can see that most of them have always been based on products related to petroleum, such as petroleum gas, crude petroleum, and refined petroleum. Also, fertilizers have been exported in a huge amount. Thus, principal exporting sectors include mineral products, chemical products, and textiles. Now, analyzing imports, products related to petroleum and wheat have always been imported. However, more technological and capital products have increased, as cars, medicines, and equipment. This can be evidenced on the most important sectors, which include machines and transport. For the services, we can evidence that sectors as personal travel, transportation, and computer information services have always been exported and imported. For the analysis, we can affirm that exports are mostly based on commodities and land-based products. In the other hand, importing sectors include machinery, transport, and mineral products, which include refined petroleum. Even though imports include animal products, vegetable products, and other commodities, a huge part of the imports includes capital-based products, and this can be observed on the tree map. We can observe that the number of imports and exports has increased over time. However, the product distribution on imports and exports has not changed significantly. The comparative advantage theory can explain why the country exports many land-based products and imports an important number of capital and technological products. The product range theory and intra-industrial trade can explain why the country imports and exports many land-based products.
Now we will analyze the financial account of Egypt. First, let's talk about the foreign direct investment. As we can see in the following table, the foreign direct investment has been in a deficit for the past 10 years. The negative sign refers to money coming into Egypt. A deficit in the foreign direct investment means that for the past 10 years, other countries and investors have seen Egypt as a potential investing country. This means that companies from Egypt can grow even more, which can strengthen the national economy, but it also means that Egypt has a larger debt with other investors, meaning more interest payments. We can see on the graph how 2022 was a year with a lot of investing into Egypt. This happened because in 2022, Egypt was a country from the MENA that closed the greatest number of deals. Also, Egypt is a country with important energy resources like natural gas and petroleum, which attract other countries to invest into it. Also, Egypt has implemented some government policies that aim to attract more foreign investors. In terms of the portfolio investment, we can see how it is a more volatile section, mostly because of the nature of this section, as it includes bonds, equity, and financial assets, which can vary a lot through the years. There have been two mainstream points in the graph, one of them in 2017 and the other in 2022. The one in 2017 was produced because of the amount of financial assets of Egypt that other foreign investors were buying, which led to a high inflow of money. In 2022, there was a reduction of the holding of local financial securities, meaning that investors were selling more than they were buying. Lastly, we have the backflows. Although it is a very volatile section, we can see that it usually has a deficit, meaning that the other countries are safekeeping their money in Egypt in a higher amount than Egypt saving its money in other countries' banks. It is a volatile section because people can withdraw money from other country banks in an easy way, as well as deposit money in other banks. Lastly, let's see the bigger picture of the balance of payments. As we stated before, we can see how the current account is on a deficit, mainly because of the amount of imports and interest payments that Egypt does every year. This generates a debt for Egypt in the foreign currency, which can be problematic and unsustainable in the long term. We can also see how the financial account is in a surplus, meaning that money from other countries or foreign investors is coming into Egypt. Although it also means that Egypt owes more money, and they must pay some interest on that money. We can also see how the capital account, although it is not zero every year, has a very low magnitude of millions of dollars in comparison to the current account and the financial account that are in billions of dollars. We can also see how the reserves vary through the years. This happens because in each year, the balance of payments is different. In some years, like 2017, there is a surplus, and in others, a deficit, like 2021. If there is a surplus, then the reserves will increase in order to balance the balance of payments, and on the other side, if there is a deficit, the reserves will decrease. Reserves always move in the opposite direction of the balance of payments. As we can see, the balance of payments is zero in every year. The years they have 100,000 deficit is because the numbers of the IMF are rounded.
To conclude, we can see that in the macroeconomic aspects, even though Egypt has a relative low poverty rate, it can do much more better, same as in the inequality aspect reflected by the Gini index. Egypt must analyze why there are more people leaving the country than entering. Also, they should reflect on the information presented by the Global Gender Gap Report and the EQR organization about the PM 2.5 pollution on the atmosphere.
To conclude the current account, Egypt has a current account deficit, which means that they're in debt in a foreign currency, which is unsustainable in the long term. It also means that Egypt relies a lot on foreign products, as they consume more than they produce. Also, Egypt is a target of investors, which produces a deficit in the primary income.
Now, to move into the conclusions of the commercial partners of our country, we can affirm that the product range theory explains part of Egypt's trade. The country must extract positive things from the FTA with some countries of Europe and its commercial relationship with China and the United States. Moving to the commercialized products, concepts as comparative advantage, product range theory, and inter-industrial trade can explain the goods and services traded by Egypt. It is important to analyze the fact that most of the country's exports are based on a finite good, petroleum.
To sum up the financial account, Egypt is a very attractive country to invest in, mainly because of the strategic location it has, the amount of energy resources, and economic policies that aim to attract new investors. This explains the inflow of money into Egypt, although it also means more debt and more interest payments. Lastly, Egypt's balance of payments has a main problematic, which is the deficit in the current account, as it can provoke the original SIM problematic, which can really affect Egypt's welfare. In fact, in the last 2 years, the currency has devaluated more than 100%, which can make this problematic even worse. A way to reduce this problematic is by reducing the foreign direct investment, as it will reduce the interest payments and would probably produce a surplus in the primary income. Also, Egypt should look for ways to boost their national economy, to reduce the number of imports, even though it is very difficult for Egypt to achieve this because of their location, as it is a very arid country and it isn't the most advanced in terms of technology. Egypt could also try to boost their exports in order to reduce the deficit in the trade balance. This will have a big impact on the current account, although it is not something that happens out of the blue.